Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to this conversation that engages with technology cooperation in the fourth industrial revolution. This is indeed a very important theme that all of us must engage with in 2022, and this is a good time for us to learn from the past 2 years and build on that. To do that, we have a very eminent panel with us today. We have Hans Vestberg, Chairman and CEO, Verizon Communications, and Chair of the Edison Alliance, the work that he's doing with the forum. We have Sunil Bharti Mittal, Chairman of Bharti Enterprises, a very eminent name in the digital sector, someone who's been engaged with the forum for a very long time, and Minister Paula Ingabire from a very dynamic country of Rwanda, where she's in charge of information and communication technologies and innovation. Before we move to the business end of this discussion, let me, at this point, invite all our online participants to engage with us via the Slido QR code on your screens. Please point the smartphone at the QR code, follow the link, and select the tech cooperation session. And do send in your questions and comments for the excellent speakers we have with us on this panel. We will first invite our speakers to briefly share their thoughts on the theme and the prognosis for the year ahead. I will thereafter pose a few questions and engage the panelists in a conversation, and then bring in audience comments and interventions into the mix. Please feel free to pose your questions as they occur to you, and we will try and include them in the conversation. But before I ask the panelists to share their opening thoughts, let me share some framing observations. It would be safe to say that the need for tech cooperation has never been greater. As businesses, societies, and individuals, we have never been more dependent on technology and indeed on our digital platforms. The pandemic has only accelerated this reliance. We have used innovation in responding to the pandemic. For example, the tech-enabled vaccine efforts. We have relied on technology for our livelihoods during the pandemic, what we call the work from home age. And of course, we rely on the digital for connecting as families and communities. For example, the panel discussion today that we are all a part of. We can all agree that making technology available to all has to be a global imperative in the days ahead. And therefore, cooperation becomes crucial to offer access at appropriate price points to include many who have been underserved until now. And we need to do this at scale and with speed, in a manner that fosters confidence among all stakeholders. The Global South and the emerging economies will experience their largest transformations in the fourth industrial revolution. For these countries, partnerships are essential to meet their development priorities and indeed their growth aspirations. Trust in technology will be vital. And without trust, the benefits of innovation will be lost. The global vaccine story is indeed a good case in point. Vaccine adoption by societies is clearly a function of trust in innovation and, of course, communication strategies that national governments have deployed. We have to do this at a time when globalization is facing very strong headwinds. Supply chains, trade, services, raw materials are all becoming part of national security assessments and indeed of parochial politics. The sector and domain has already been weaponized by some actors, both state and non-state. And therefore, as we enter 2022, a new year, we must ponder on how the world can respond to this new moment that sees returns of gates and fences in our global landscape. And in this discussion, we seek to do just that. Let me now invite our panelists to deliver their opening remarks, brief opening remarks of perhaps a couple of minutes. And let me start by Hans Vestberg, the proceedings for this evening. Hans, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amir, and great to be here to discuss such an important topic. I will try to keep it brief, but I think that, Amir, you talked about a couple of very important things. The pandemic has really showed how important to be digital connected. We have probably leapfrogged 5 to 7 years when it comes to the digital transformation. Today, it's a necessity to work from home or do healthcare digitally, online banking. Everything is sort of set up for that. And that is, of course, a very important piece of what we see today. This is, of course, posting, as Samir said, also a risk of more disparity in our society. As if you are not connected, you cannot get access to some of these important services. Today, in our society, it shouldn't matter where you're born or where you live or where you come from. You should have the same opportunity. And one of those opportunities, of course, is bridging the technology gap. I mean, today we have 3.6 billion people that are not connected, not part of the internet. However, 85% of those people actually have broadband coverage. That tells you a little bit about the story we need to work with. But it's also 2 billion people that doesn't have healthcare. 1.7 billion doesn't have a bank account, and more than 260 million kids that has no education. To build the world with brick and mortar is going to be hard. To see that everybody has the same opportunity, it's basically impossible. We need to use the 21st century's infrastructure, which is mobility, broadband, and cloud services, in order to get it accessible, affordable, and have the right application and scalability. That's why we, together with the World Economic Forum, decided in the beginning of last year to form the Edison Alliance. The Edison Alliance is a group of some 45 multidisciplined people, champions we call them, from private, public, education, from academia. And what we decided was we wanted to change the life of 1 billion people by having affordable, accessible digital inclusion, focusing on education, healthcare, and financial inclusion. Firstly, we have had great progress so far with all the people coming together from all the academia, public and private, to find these solutions. But once again, I mean, for me, this is a moment in time where this infrastructure is so crucial. It's not a good to have to be connected. It's actually a human right to be connected, because that will actually create a much better world and much equal world, and everybody has the same chance. That's the backdrop we created Edison Alliance.
Thank you, Hans. I'm going to quiz you on that in a moment. I'll come back to you. Let me now turn it over to Mr. Sunil Bharti Mittal for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Samir. Hans, my very dear old friend, has set the stage and really mentioned all the key points that are important for our discussion today. But in my own opinion, if I may add, the fourth industrial revolution, which came upon us in the last few years, has truly now shown itself in this last 2.5 years to be the only possible way to take away the poverty of the world, to support all the SDG goals that UN has set up by 2030. There is no other way but for us to serve the society, but in a very strong digital infrastructure that needs to be provided across the entire globe. Hans is right, billions of people are still not on internet. And why are they not on internet? Of course, partly because they don't have the coverage, but many people have the coverage, but not affordability. So in today's session, we are also going to talk about affordability. If a country like India can provide very high quality, large dollops of data per month at $3, there's no reason why we can't carry this through into Africa and marginalized parts of the world where affordability is an issue. So we will talk about affordability today as well. Then whatever we may do as an industry, whether it's Verizon or it's Airtel and many, many hundreds of other operators and mobile broadband providers and fixed providers, we will still not be able to reach the last billion. They are in places which are almost impossible to cover by fiber. Even with very large amounts of investments, we can't cover them through radio networks. And to do all that, about $425 billion are required in the next 9 years, so that we have ubiquitous coverage for every citizen of this world. Thankfully, the advent of LEO-based constellations of satellites is coming as a savior for the last 1 billion. We will be, and we are not talking about many years into the future, we are talking about months from now, we'll be able to cover every square inch of the world, be that oceans, be that mountains, be that forests or deserts. Every square inch of the world will be covered. But satellite communication is expensive. It requires expensive ground and user terminals. This is where, again, some of the players in the digital ecosystem, the governments, will have to all come together to provide affordability to those who may otherwise never get connected. So I will rest at that, and we'll cover these points going forward.
And Mr. Mittal, I'm going to ask you on how can cooperations shape this ambition that you've just outlined, and what is the specifics of that cooperation? Let me now turn to Minister Paula Ingabire from Rwanda for her very important perspective on the theme of this panel. Madam Minister, over to you.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you for having us this afternoon. I think both Hans and Sunil have set the stage for the conversation we're going to have in the next couple of minutes as we think about technology cooperation in the fourth industrial revolution. What we're going to be looking at is how cooperation partnerships are so essential to tackling some of the global issues, and one being the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all going through. And so I think for many governments, similarly to Rwanda, is that we're all thinking about recovery in the year ahead. And while we're doing that, we're already looking at what are those challenges that have been highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Both Sunir and Hans did highlight access, adoption, affordability. And these are the kind of common challenges that we are all grappling with, maybe at different scales. And maybe for some of us, highlighting some parts of these challenges more than the other parts of the world. But again, what we're also going to be focused on in the year ahead is how do we safeguard some of the gains that have been realized from this cooperation that we've seen manifesting globally, but also cooperation that we've also seen in our local jurisdictions are happening across the board. Hans did talk about the Edison Alliance, which, has championed the 1 billion lives challenge that is already going on. We've focused on about 3 areas, access to quality education, financial inclusion, as well education, financial inclusion, as well as agriculture. And so one of the things we're looking at before I close off on this is the lighthouse countries. And what we're looking to do is how do we create a network of like-minded countries that are able to galvanize the partnerships and collaborations that we need to sort of drive the digital transformation that we need to see across the board. Really looking at the commitments that the network under Edison Alliance has created to drive these kind of partnerships. So as I close on my remarks, the key things that we're going to be looking at is how do we inspire technology transfer across the different jurisdictions? How do we enable the right skills that are needed to drive this kind of transformation? How do we unlock innovative financing models that are going to drive accelerated implementation? And lastly, as policymakers, how do we put in place an enabling policy and regulatory environment that is going to nurture these kind of innovations across the board? So in a nutshell, I think these are some of the things that we're going to be focused on, and it's such a timely conversation.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Hans, let me turn back to you and actually ask you to expand on the imperatives you clearly stated, the business imperatives of responding to some of the real world challenges. How widespread is the appetite for businesses to do this? And in your view, how and why should businesses build responsible behavior, responsible imperatives into their strategies?
Thank you. I think that we have seen a dramatic change over the last 5 to 10 years from corporation to see that they are managing all stakeholders, stakeholder capitalism. And that's really to see that you actually are having shareholders, your customers, your employees, but also society doing responsible business. And that hangs together in order to have a successful company. I think that many corporations feel like that. And if you're a technology company, it's very obvious that you should be part of this when it comes, for example, in our case, broadband, STEM education is very, very important for our future. And that's also where we put our responsible business. I mean, Verizon will between 2020 and 2025 invest $3 billion billion in education in schools in the United States, where we have our majority of our business, when it comes not only having broadband access, but also the device and the application and the education for the teachers, in order to see that this is not just a philanthropy. For us, this is a business, part of our business strategy. And that's how I see the technology company, but any type of company should see that what are their contribution to the society and how that hang together with their overall strategy. So the only thing I say, it has to be part of the strategy. It cannot be philanthropy. Even though I love philanthropy, but if you're going to have it in a private company, it has to be part of the strategy that you serve all the stakeholders. And that's how we do it here with technology.
So, Hans, is there a case for industry-led or an industry government-led or maybe a multi-stakeholder arrangement that catalyzes and incentivizes adoption of these principles in businesses? Do you think it is still too ad hoc and still too personality?
No. I don't think so. It's much more structured like that. And that's how the Edison Alliances came together. Even though I'm coming from the private sector, I've spent a long time with the SDGs, with the UN. I'm in the board of the UN Foundation. I go in between these two different type of words, and I try to get them together, because ultimately it's not one company, not one government, one unit that can solve the problem with digital inclusion. We have to do it together. And that's what's all about in this Edison Alliance, to see that we bring all the best practices together. And I just want to finish by saying what Minister Ingeberg and what Sunil said. There's important to think about the three pieces to make this happen. Accessibility to the technology, affordability, and then the applications, because you need all three of them. And that is not one company nor one government. You have to do it crossover.
Thank you, Hans. Mr. Mittal, let me turn to you, and let me actually ask you two questions. In your assessment, what has been the impact of the pandemic on the relationship of your consumers and generally the larger society with technology? How has that changed? And what are, in some ways, the imperatives for cooperation, therefore, in the technology domain? What are the kind of governance innovations that are required to cater to this new relationship that users have with their devices or with broadband connectivity? So maybe if you could shed some light on that, the lessons from the last 2 years for you.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Interestingly, the consumers had stopped thinking about broadband providers or the mobile operators. It was really their main attachment to the device that they had or the destination they were visiting, whether it was the Facebook or Instagram or a particular site they were looking at. Broadband connectivity or mobile providers were seen just as a pass-through entity. However, during this pandemic, I must say, there was a significant appreciation of the so-called pipe, that there is something out there which connects us to the most important parts of our daily lives, and that is telecom networks and broadband networks. People were able to manage their healthcare very efficiently through various sites that the government had populated. The entire vaccine arrangements and the vaccine passports or the vaccine control, or in fact the contact tracing, all was enabled through technology and broadband connectivity. And people suddenly started to realize the power and benefit of both these things coming together. Financial services. During this 2 years of near lockdown, people were able to conduct their businesses, small and medium enterprises, daily breadwinners could transfer monies back to their homes and villages. All this came alive, and the absence of physical infrastructure like bank branches or going to an ATM, all this was enabled by the mobile and digital networks. Food delivery at home. So the other very important aspect was people had to kept on getting their food in timely manner and efficient manner. So I think the power of digital connectivity and the digital players really accelerated in the last 2 years. And importantly, even the government and the regulators suddenly woke up that it's easy to go and win elections by committing for subsidized foods, free electricity and water to every home. And in cases like India and some of the other developed countries, gas stove and gas cooking at home. And all these things, suddenly brought also government as a stakeholder to say perhaps an affordable, high-quality broadband connectivity to each and every citizen is important too. Yet, there is one big element missing, and that is funding for a very large spread of infrastructure that needs to come through. How do we, on a global basis, bring all the stakeholders together, in which regulators and governments have a big role to play, but also the OTT players who benefit from the connectivity, the broadband players who spend hundreds of billions of dollars to get some share of their gains that they get out of digital connectivity. Recently, the European operators, a very large number of them came together to put out a letter to say the OTT players, the digital players need to start to partake some of the responsibility to roll out new age digital, high quality, high speed broadband networks. So this truly requires a universal approach. This can't be left just on the shoulders of mobile and broadband players. Then they keep on investing, looking at 3 or 4% IRR each year, and everybody else in the ecosystem transfers the value on one side, and government keeps on taking a lot of money out of auctions or out of taxes on the mobile industry only. So there needs to be a new order.
So there's a question from the audience already, and I want to bring that in because there's another important set of stakeholders that people are worried about. Of course, we talk about the workforce displacement and what it does to jobs. But besides the future of work itself and the future of jobs, there is also the SMEs. And there is a chance to reinvigorate the SME sectors and make them part of the news story. But there is also a fear that you will subsume them. The big players will, in some ways, cannibalize their presence. How do we engage and protect and rather strengthen these two aspects of our fourth industrial revolution life?
Well, I think it's a very important question. And any society, any industry, any country cannot survive with a very robust distributed supply chain, especially when the world is again rewriting the supply chain, moving large parts out of China. It is flowing into a very equitable basis in every society. I mean, without look at our electronic industry, for example, manufacturing industry. A lot of small industries are coming up supplying components to the big players. Automobile is a classic example where India has mushroomed a variety of small, medium enterprises, which are fueling their supplies into the larger players. So same with food, same with the Kirana shops in India, the mom and pop shops. What we need to do is what Hans mentioned, make it a business case to accelerate their digital adoption. I think that is where many of us are already working to ensure millions of SMEs are being served by my company, for example, so that they have the right tools, they're on the cloud, they have training, so that they can participate in the digital new wave of ecosystem.
And I'll come back to you on what do you want in the year 2022, but I'll come back a little later on what could be some types of cooperation that we must focus on. But let me turn to Minister Ingabire. Madam Minister, in your assessment, what is the role of policy and governments in ensuring technology is addressing these common concerns, the global issues we just spoke about? And more importantly, as an audience question asks, how can we cooperate to enable leapfrogging rather than just catching up by those who had been left behind in the previous technology waves? So is there a moment to do more than just catch up and to actually help new nations and new communities take leadership?
Thank you, Samir. And maybe before I come back to those two great set of questions, I don't want to leave Hans still wondering if we're still part of the same alliance. When I did mention agriculture, it shows how I'm very passionate to have agriculture join the streams of the areas of focus under Edison Alliance. So just for clarity and maybe mostly for our followers, the three areas are healthcare, education, and financial inclusion. So I'm sure agriculture at some point will be a key area of cooperation. Given that we have many of our economies that are dependent on this as a source of growth for many of the African countries. But back to your questions, the two questions you asked, Samir. technology is so central to providing solutions. And when we think about the role of policy and governance, I think in many ways, for me, it's the ability to build trust and for people to look at technology as an opportunity, not a threat. On their drive on the insurance that they could get. And so there's all this conversation around trust and how we can reinforce trust through policy. But I think at the end of the day, the key thing around the role of policy and governance is to provide that openness and transparency. How do we communicate better using policies? How do we provide greater transparency using policies? Because at the end of the day, trust is the oxygen of these emerging and fourth industrial technologies that we are deploying. On that note, even as we just to tie it to the second question, which is really around how do we cooperate to leapfrog? And I think Rwanda is a perfect example for that, when we worked with both the World Economic Forum in creating performance-based regulations around drones. Now, when we were deploying the use case around drones, there wasn't any existence of a global standard around drone regulation. So we could have chosen as a country to really be in the wait and see mode until someone else puts in place some regulations that can be globally embraced, and then we decide to deploy some use cases. But what we were focused on was how do we address challenges that were so eminent to us at that point in time? And one of them was around healthcare. It was how we can deliver timely medical products to some of the rural hospitals. And drones seemed like a very good solution to addressing some of this challenge that we had, which was really around timeliness and reducing on the wastage that was happening, especially when you're looking at blood products. So in doing so, I think what we've seen is that the cooperation that we had with forums like the World Economic Forum was the ability to create regulations that were agile enough to adapt to the changing need of the drone technology. And this could apply to any other fourth industrial revolution technology, AI, automated vehicles, blockchain, drones, and IoT. But at the same time, I think the challenge we are faced with as policymakers is that the accelerated pace of innovations and digital transformation, we're not able to match that. So when it comes to the pace at which we develop policies and regulations, you can't regulate what you don't know. And so in many times, if you have so many innovations that are happening, the question is, how do you create these agile governance frameworks? How do you create an agile process of building policies and regulations in a way that you don't stifle innovation, but at the same time, you are protecting, any unintended consequences or misuse of these technologies. So as we address these challenges, and just to close on this point, I think there are common challenges around privacy, data sharing, cybersecurity, and the key thing for us is how we build our policies and regulations in a way that is going to safeguard and build the trust that is needed as we deploy many of these solutions.
So I'm going to actually turn to both
these solutions.
So I'm going to actually turn to both Hans and Sunil to speak on the trust issue, because there is a whole new mood, surveillance capitalism, techlash, and many other hashtags do the round on social media. But Madam Minister, let me ask you another question. Sitting in Africa, the future belongs to you. One of the fastest growing regions of the world, one of the most best governed countries, Rwanda. How do you see this new moment in globalization, where we are seeing contests emerge? We are seeing the big power contest over control of technology, politics, economic pipelines. How do emerging economies such as Rwanda and many others in the continent respond to this new moment? That there is geopolitics coming into everything today, right? The geopolitics of everything. It's something that must be concerning you.
Absolutely, very much. And I think worrying for many of us. But at the same time, I think this is where this whole stakeholder capitalism and the talk around cooperation is very essential. There is learning from what the others have done, but there's also understanding what is needed for you. And I want to tie it back to the previous question you asked around leapfrogging, because with all this contest happening, around the world, if you remain in a wait and see mode and you're really trying to see how others going to figure it out, then most likely leapfrogging will not happen. We're just going to be doing catch up, like you say, playing catch up with the technological revolution that is happening. Yet at the same time, we have immense opportunities for developing countries such as ours, where you don't have legacy infrastructure, you don't have legacy policies, so that is already an opportunity to leapfrog. And so the idea for us again is how are we leveraging all these collaborations and partnerships, and really looking at some of these global debates that are happening in a lens that is going to support the transition that we are trying to make for our economies. Obviously, as a policymaker, what you're very concerned about is what are the decisions and policies that we're putting in place today, and how do they affect this journey of digitalization, of the digital agenda that we're taking in place, that we're taking forward. And so for countries such as ourselves, one is working together. This is one thing that we've started, whether it's from Smart Africa Alliance that has already been put in place, that brings together more than 33 countries that are all focused on how do we collectively drive the digital transformation agenda, whether it's the Edison Alliance, which we also subscribe to, whether, so looking at all these global platforms where we know we have a shared objective as African countries, starting with even African countries, and really understanding how do we work together to make sure what is happening is something that is good for Africa, but is also good for our development.
So clearly, you're hoping that Africa will be able to benefit from all partnerships rather than being forced to choose sides here, and in some ways. And let me now turn to both Hans and Sunil to respond to the trust question, something that Minister Ingabire had raised in her intervention. How do you build trust? What can we do to rebuild confidence in our consumers, users, and society, which seem to believe that technology has, in some sense, been taking them to places they don't want to be in? And how do you navigate this new geopolitical moment where different power groups are competing for shaping the fourth industrial revolution? So Hans, can I turn to you, please?
Yeah, no, first of all, I think Minister Ingabire has a very good read on what needs to be done. Agile governance and regulation are going to be important because technology is moving fast. I think one of the most important things, of course, is transparency for companies that are working in this world, because ultimately you're going to be judged by your customers, how you are acting and what you do with their data and how you share it or not share it. I think that's going to be the most important. They're going to come so much new technologies constantly, so regulate technology is going to be hard, but regulate the transparency of corporations is going to be important. And we have actually seen over the last 2 years a very important move from our consumers, trying to understand, asking more questions about their data, etc. And we give them more options as well in order to decide over their own data. I think that's going to be very important for companies like ours. And I think we're going to be judged by that ultimately, how transparent we are, because ultimately there are so many people on earth, there are so many different views on what is risk for different people. They need to have a choice to actually choose that, because technology is going to be embedded in our society. It's going to be crucial for having a successful and equal world. So we just need to use it, but we need to find a framework for it. So I think that collaboration between what corporations are doing and what governments are doing is absolutely crucial. And I see that start happening right now. And that's the way forward.
And how do you navigate the political moment?
At the political moment, I think that in general, there are so many different facets of politics when you're running a global corporation. I think that what we have decided is that we speak up on things that are important for our strategy and our employees and our stakeholders. And that's how we connect it. Even though I personally can have opinions about things happening in the world, we speak up when we think it's important for our stakeholders and how we succeed as a company. If is that diversity in the workplace, or it's equal pay and things like that, then we speak up also politically in order for us to show that we are behind our stakeholders.
Thank you. Sunil, over to you. The issue of trust, rebuilding trust or strengthening trust, and of course, navigating this political moment.
Technology always is a double-edged sword. It's always been. Historically, every technology, unfortunately, also brings with it, some negatives. And therefore, it becomes the job of all stakeholders to ensure that as we harvest all the goodness of technology, we minimize, it's probably impossible to eliminate, we minimize the negative stuff that comes out of technology. Customers are right today when one of the most important sources of the fourth industrial revolution is data. And everything now depends on data across the globe and is free flowing all the time. Can the customer have trust of the entire ecosystem, be that the operators who connect them or the sites there where they land as a destination, and the connected financial infrastructure across the globe, so that their data is safe, they have the privacy when they conduct their routine or jobs behind the digital framework, and importantly, there is no abuse of the same. This is where I would say all of us, whether it's through World Economic Forum, through Addison Alliance, through United Nations, through our conversations with regulators, and of course the platform of agencies like GSMA, we try to work as much as possible towards mitigating this stuff. Every company of ours or in the ecosystem put a lot of stuff around cybersecurity, around data protection, importantly also ensuring that the customers are safe, our children are safe in terms of abuse of some of the data and digital negativism that can happen. But in the end, I think this is absolutely a large-scale international effort and alliance that is required. This is no different from nuclear disarmament. Just in the lines of where we have ensured for long decades that the nuclear proliferation does not happen around the globe, equally, I think we have to ensure that we have a very strong alliance where we do not allow those actors who are going and compromising customer data, nations' data, or are indeed corrupting the minds of some of our young people across the globe to put out a discourse which is unfriendly to nations, which is against society, religious issues, intolerance issues. All these things need to be controlled. It's a big task. We have unleashed a huge tiger out there with the technologies that have come out. It's very easy to go and put up a site today and start to disseminate whatever you want. Governments are aware, regulators are aware. I think our politicians are aware that we need to continuously arm ourselves up to ensure that the world and society at large is safe. One of the areas where each one of us are working is putting a lot of investment in the area of cybersecurity. If you see the last 4 or 5 years, there are now so many cybersecurity companies, specialists in each area, supporting the digital ecosystem and revolution to mitigate and eliminate as much as possible the risk of digital connectivity.
I have to intervene because we are running out of time. It is very difficult to capture a very rich set of interventions from all of you, but I take away 3 ideas that I think are central. One is what Minister Ngabire clearly outlined as being agile governance, agile regulatory frameworks, principle-based and outcome-based, and in many ways serving society and progress of people. The second idea that I take back is what Mr. Mittal suggested. We need a new war chest to ensure that we are able to serve the last human being on the planet. Technology is available to all, and how do we create that financial architecture in the future is going to be extremely important. And finally, something that Hans mentioned has remained with me, that we need to create a multi-stakeholder and a multi-layered engagement framework that actually builds sustainable responsibility into business models, because you're actually serving your bottom lines as well as society when you do that. Now, with that, let me turn it over to Jeremy Jurgen, the Managing Director at the World Economic Forum, for his closing comments.
Samir,
Jeremy.
Great. Thank you for the excellent wrap up there, Samir. It's an excellent session today, so I'd like to thank yourself as well as all the other panelists here. I'd also like to reiterate my thanks for the support and efforts throughout the year that we've had from Hans, Sunil, and Minister Ingabire on our collective work. This includes both the Edison Alliance, where we're actively working with a number of companies, national governments, NGOs, to address the challenges of access and make sure that this is done in a way that's equitable and that everyone can benefit from the fourth industrial revolution. I'd also like to highlight the work that we've done that Minister Ingabire referenced in Rwanda, where we've worked not only on drone delivery systems for healthcare, but also looking at how we can use new advances in artificial intelligence to facilitate care in the country, and we're exploring new domains. These are all extremely important efforts, and we wouldn't be able to do it without the collective support of our partners and governments around the world in each of these areas. I'd also like for the audience who's joined us today, I'd invite you to visit our website. You can go more in depth on each of these initiatives that we've discussed today. You can also learn about the work that we're doing around cybersecurity, trust, and digital security. Sunil referred to this in his remarks. We have a very strong program on digital safety and what we're doing there to promote safe access to the internet for all ages and all groups, and how we need collective efforts from all parties to contribute to that. So each of these efforts will be very important to ensure that we can fully benefit from the fourth industrial revolution. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for your contributions today. Look forward to our next discussion and to continuing our work throughout the year ahead. Thank you.